So let's we're getting towards the end of the show. We got to talk about some tight ends. So let's move into that. Mark Andrews right off the rip. I mean, my biggest thing with Mark Andrews is please, oh please, can you please stay healthy? Exactly. And Chris, you seem to have faith that he will, because you have him, you said 1 or 2, you have him ranked depending on Rashee Rice's suspension. So explain yourself.
Yeah, so I mean, I know everybody wants to have a new tight end. They do that every year. I watched it, for Mark Andrews himself, and they try to crown him over Travis Kelce a few years back. But what's happening right now, for why I have that kind of in between, is I think Travis Kelce is still going to have a lot of targets in Kansas City, but I think it's going to be limited if Rashee Rice's suspension is only for a couple of games, say 4 games. Then I think Mark Andrews is going to kind of battle with him for that one spot. But if he's out for, let's say, half the season or longer, then I think now you're going to see Travis Kelce have 2 receivers on the outside of him, and he's going to be able to eat really well. So that's kind of why I'm looking at it. But why I have Mark Andrews so much confidence is I do expect him to be healthy. I don't hold the injuries against guys unless I think it's an injury thing that seems to be consistent with you. Saying it's an injury that you have ongoing that happens to you. Getting hip tackled or hip checked and tackled doesn't happen very often for Mark Andrews' career, where they want costing him games. So it's not something I'm going to act like, oh, this guy's injury prone. And I look at when he does play, who by far, we talk about Zay Flowers all you want, who by far is Lamar Jackson's favorite target? It's always been Mark Andrews, whether it's in the red zone, whether it's on the field. And when he plays, he's consistent as can be. So I look at a guy who I love, and when he has been healthy, has been that tight end one that you can bank on. So Mark Andrews, for me, is a guy that I'm willing to kind of stick my neck out for this year. And when we're reminding people, don't forget about this, because Sam Laporta had a nice year last year.
Well, I'm going to fire back real quick, Chris, because the point is with Mark Andrews is that this is a guy who only 1 year has had double-digit touchdowns. I do think that's a factor here, and part of that is to do with Lamar Jackson only having 1 year where he actually threw over 30 touchdowns, and that corresponds with the same year Mark Andrews has 1 year where he had 10. And when
previous to that, where did you have Mark Andrews as your tight end? With all taking that 1 year of touchdowns, where had you always had Mark Andrews ranked as your tight end?
I usually had him at 3 or 4. I was never really had him at a 2 guy for that reason, because he didn't get as many touchdowns as you would want him to, because he wasn't a threat to really go for 900 plus yards in most seasons. I think he only has 1 season. I'm looking at it now, only 1 season that we got 1,000 yards, and he only had.
Who was your 2 going into last year and the previous year then?
I have to look it up. I have to see it. I think I had George Kittle actually ahead of Mark Andrews going into last year because of Brock Purdy and the touchdowns I was projecting him to get, which kind of came to pass. But Mark Andrews, other than the year where he had 1,300 yards, he's never even had over 900 yards in a single season. So Andrews is one of those guys. He's definitely a top 5 tight end, and I have him at 3 going into this season. But it's not somebody. I don't think he has that same pop of a Sam Laporta, the same pop of a Travis Kelce going.
How many yards did Sam Laporta have last year?
Advocate.
No, devil's advocate back. What did Sam Laporta's yards last year?
He had 937, so he still had more yards than most seasons that Mark Andrews has had. Plus, he's had the double-digit touchdown.
Wasn't 1,300 though? Just want to remind people.
Wasn't 1,300? No, he hasn't had that. Also, it was only his rookie year, so I think it goes a little bit back and forth as far as that goes. Yeah, we will see. Let's go to David Njoku. Chase, I'm going to get to you, and then Bob. So you both have him ranked at 10. Chase, David Njoku. This is the fact that we don't have a Joe Flacco. I mean, it's like he's going back to Joe Flacco because with Deshaun Watson, David Njoku wasn't that great. So why is he still in your top 10?
Well, because I think he still has the same talent. And like I said, I mean, we saw flashes from Watson last season where I think he can be a serviceable quarterback. All he has to be is serviceable and use the weapon that's in front of him. David Njoku is still in front of him. He was not as good with Watson last season as with Flacco. But I think if we could ever get a full season out of Deshaun Watson, I still think he's got enough juice to put up a top 10 season, which – I think he's a draftable. He's draftable as a tight end 1. I'm not going high on him, but I still think that even with a full season of Deshaun Watson, he's got the juice to be a 1.
Yeah, Bob, I don't know. It's hard to tell. I mean, it's small sample size, right? But with 5 games with Deshaun Watson, games with Deshaun Watson, his pace was really short. Go ahead.
Right. And again, as we discussed, though, Watson didn't have any great games anyway, throwing the ball.
Right.
But I feel like being a top 10 tight end isn't that hard to do if you play every game. The one thing I will give credit to Njoku is he's a badass. He will stay out there. I mean, the man caught his face on fire and played football the same week. That's a badass, folks. I don't care who you are. So he'll be out. If your wide receivers can play every week, you're going to be top 10 in scoring. Now, you're not going to be greatly consistent, which actually Njoku was last year. But you're right. Only two. He was 40% consistent when Watson was at the helm, where the rest of the season was without him, and he did much better. But he's still a weapon. And when you've got Cooper, Judy, all these guys around him, somebody's going to leave Njoku open, and that's where he's dangerous, especially near the end zone. He just does a really good job as a red zone threat. So, where he's going, he's pick 101. If you just want to wait on your tight end, you don't want to get, Laporta, Kelsey, McBride, Andrews, those kind of guys. Njoku's a decent player. He was top 6 in points and consistency last year. I'm totally fine getting him that late as my starter, and maybe then I pick up a Dallas Goedert or Schultz or somebody else to pair with him. I'm good with that.
Yeah, I will say the fact that he didn't perform well with Watson does seem to be baked in to his ADP right now. And maybe you pair him up with one of these guys. All right, we have our first and only showdown of the night because our rankings were so similar throughout the night. But we got Pat Freiermuth here. Chase and Chris are going to battle it out. Bob's going to be the judge of who gets to win this debate here. So, Chris, you got him at 10. Chase, you got him all the way down to 17. Chris, why are you high on Pat Freiermuth being a low-end tight end 1 in 2024?
Well, I think a lot of similar reasons you guys talked about David Njoku. Look, David Njoku had a career high 6 touchdowns last year as his career high. So we're going to hold out Pat Freiermuth. His career high touchdowns was 7 his rookie year. He had 2 the previous year, and last year wasn't so great. But we look at Arthur Smith, and this is where the Arthur Smith thing does matter, Dan, and we're actually excited maybe fantasy-wise, Bob, where maybe he goes up a little bit, somebody's chart, at least in my book, where we saw last year 1/3 of the targets were from the Atlanta Falcons were targeted towards the tight end position last year. We could bitch about Kyle Pitts. He's one of the high guys who got a decent amount of targets in the tight end position. So did Jonnu Smith. This is a historically guy that Arthur Smith loves to, was a tight ends coach in his career. So it loves the tight end position, usually features them. Then you add the fact that from last year, we also have Russell Wilson adding to the offense. Russell Wilson, previous being added to Denver, was average, for the last 6 seasons in Seattle, had averaged about 21% target share towards the tight end position, and that bumped up to 25% when he got into the red zone. So this is a guy who loves to throw to tight ends and loves to throw to the red zone, previous getting to Denver. And I say that because the Denver whole situation, tight end position was weird. It was going to be Dulcich. They had different coaching staffs. They're rotating different guys in and out. Some people are going to talk about, the target share from the tight end position last year, hold that against Russell Wilson. Historically, Russell Wilson usually features the tight end position. He usually does throw the ball in the middle. And that's what Arthur Smith likes to do as a coach, put those things together. And then he's healthy, as Bob said. Basically, if you're out there and you're healthy, you're a top 10 tight end option, and Pat Freiermuth to me can be that guy. A little more upside.
Okay. All right. Compelling stuff. Chase, why do you got him down at 17?
Okay, well, let me start this off by saying once again, FAS. Listen, I know that Arthur Smith likes the tight end position, and we saw it last season that he liked his tight end position. He just kept throwing it to Jonnu Smith, and when he had Kyle Pitts available, listen, here's the thing, though. Pat Freiermuth as an athlete is not Kyle Pitts or Jonnu Smith, not even close, okay? He's prototypical size for a tight end, but he is not the athlete. He's not the speed that Pitts is, or even the Jonnu Smith is. So let's just get that out of the way for one. For two, listen, there's certainly an argument to be made that Freiermuth could end up being the number 2 target on this team. With Johnson being gone, we know there's a ton of targets available, but it's not a given that he absorbs all those targets from Johnson. Like I said, the running backs could get some of those. Who the hell knows what Roman Wilson's going to be? I'm not overly hyped up on him either, but here, listen, Pat Freiermuth was tight end 29 last season. Wilson, despite what Chris just tried to tell us, Wilson is not a kingmaker for the tight end position in fantasy football, okay? Russell Wilson liked throwing to the tight end position when he had future Hall of Famer Jimmy Graham as his tight end. Other than that, his tight ends have been largely irrelevant from a fantasy standpoint. And yeah, we talked about the situation in Denver the last 2 years. I don't see this being anything to write home about for Pat Freiermuth. I definitely don't want to worry about him as a wide receiver. I'm not drafting him as a tight end 1. Okay. His career fantasy points per game are 8.4 fantasy points per game. Okay. Which would have put him outside the top 12 last season. That puts him at tight end 16 last season if he had hit that. And he didn't hit that last season. Even before last season, which was his worst of the 3 seasons, he was only hitting about 9 something per game, which still puts him outside the top 12 in terms of a fantasy tight end. If you like getting 7 or 8 points a week out of your tight end, go ahead, draft him. I'm not drafting him as high as 10. And at 17, I'm pretty close to right in line with consensus on that as well.
Chase,
I'm not excited about Arthur Smith in this offense. I'm not excited about Pat Freiermuth as a player, period. So
going into real quick question, going into last year, David Njoku, how high had he finished previous to going into last year? And that's your number 10 this year. So I'm sorry.
Yeah, but David Njoku isn't playing with Arthur Smith either, and I think he's a much, much better athlete and much better weapon than Pat Freiermuth ever is.
All right, well, let's get Bob in here. Bob, decide and give your thoughts.
So here's what I'm gonna talk about both sides. Let's throw out last year. Last year was a complete joke. I even said I don't know how Kenny Pickett had Freiermuth in the middle of the field all the time and never threw to him. He was 2 for 12 in consistency, ranked 35th. But 2 years ago, he was top 8 in both total points and consistency. Played all 16 games. Hint. But 3 years ago, he played all 16 games and ranked 13th and 17th. So I feel like there's 2 different Freiermuths with 2 different offenses. So I have him ranked 15. So I'm kind of in between you guys. I feel like right now, and there's been a lot of hype. I don't know if you've seen it lately. Freiermuth came out, talked to the press. Oh, I'm so excited about this offense. Arthur Smith's going to just make me into a god. Of course, it's preseason. If I had to decide, I probably would lean a little bit closer to Chris than Chase, but it's very close because he's been on both sides. He has to get better than last year. That's a given. Can he be top 10? I don't know. I think there's too many better tight ends than there was 2 years ago. You've got Laporta, you've got Trace McBride, you've got more people filling those upper gaps where before it was basically Kelsey, Andrews, Kittle, everyone else, maybe TJ Hawkinson. So I feel like I'm leaning a little bit towards Chris just because I think it'll be a little bit better closer to 10 than I think he will be 17. Like I said, I'm at 15, but I could bump him up a few if I do see some things happening, but it's really close. I mean, again, I think he could be one or the other and I wouldn't blink an eye if he ended up 10th or if he ended up 17th. So that's a terrible decision, but that's what I'm going with.
No, that's fair. We'll give Chris the W on that one. I'll just throw this out here, and this comes down. I know the Arthur Smith. Will you actually just utilize the players you have on the field? But if you consolidate the tight end position, you're talking about a position that got 160 targets, 100 receptions, and over 1,300 yards and 7 touchdowns under Arthur Smith.
One third of his targets.
Yeah, would it shock anybody if all of a sudden Darnell Washington turns out to be a thing for Arthur Smith?
Him up? That would be my
he loves tight ends. I love tight ends, and I have one that's 6'7".
Yeah, and like I said, my caveat to that was if he actually just utilizes the talent in front of him, which is the major question when it comes to Arthur.
It's always been no one knows.
All right, so let's cap off this show with my Underdog Specials. With the future bets here, I have Deshaun Watson lower than 3,400 yards this season, plagued by a shoulder issue the last couple of years, back issues, everything in between, and his 17-game pace last year would have only put him at 3,100 yards. So Deshaun Watson lower than 3,400 yards passing this season. Derrick Henry, I think I've given this one out, but we are talking about the AFC North anyway. So Derrick Henry over 999 rushing yards, even over that every year since 2018, with the exception of 2021 when he only played 8 games. games, and he had 937 yards in those 8 games. So I'm taking Derrick Henry to get over 1,000. By the way, I'm still taking him over his touchdown prop too, which just moved up to 10.5. It was 9.5. I loved it then. I hit it then, but 10.5 now. I'm still going to hit it over the 10.5 because I do have him projected for 13 touchdowns this season. Joe Burrow, I have him higher than 28.5 passing touchdowns. Pretty much just comes down to health. I mentioned it earlier. If Joe Burrow plays 16 games, he throws over 30 touchdowns. I'm going to bet that this year he's able to stay off the injury reserve. And George Pickens, I have him higher than 1,000 yards. He had over 1,100 yards last season. That was with Pickett. That was with Deontay Johnson. Was with Mason Rudolph. So I have Pickens over 1,000 yards, and those are your Underdog Specials. Make sure you use promo code FFAdvice to get your cash bonus up to $250 and a free pick 'em pick this year. Bob, I want to thank you so much for coming and making the time to come on the show, man. You just plug away whatever you want to plug away, what you want people to check out before we leave.
Obviously, check out the fantasyfootballexpo.com. Make sure you get your tickets to come to that in August. And don't forget to get your consistency guide, because if you didn't hear that word enough, you will read it a billion times in that magazine, and you should, because it'll help you be a better drafter and a better fantasy player. So thank you guys for having me. Always a pleasure, and I appreciate see you guys in August.
Yeah, absolutely. So make sure you guys check us out on your favorite podcast app on the Operation Domination Show. Subscribe, follow along. Check us out on the YouTube channel at FF Advice Network. We have so much content coming out from all the different shows from the Fantasy Football Advice Network, and more exciting things to come that we'll be announcing, I think, within the next couple of weeks. So stay tuned on that and follow us at FF Advice on social media. We'll see you guys next week. Hey there, I'm proud to say that Underdog Fantasy is the newest sponsor of our show, and it's my favorite place to play fantasy games. No waivers, no trades, no lineup settings, just best ball for season-long drafters all year long. And you gotta check out Pick'em. It's so easy to play. Just pick 2 to 5 stats of your favorite players. You can choose whether they go higher or lower on those stats, and if you can pick 5 in a row, you can win 20 times your money. Sound like fun? Well, guess what? You can sign up with promo code FFAdvice today to claim your special pick, plus a first-time deposit offer up to $250 in bonus cash. I cannot wait to see your entries.